Hi folks, welcome to another episode of the Physical Education Podcast. Today I had Sarah Kennard on today. She is a UK-based independent health and nutrition investigator working globally online, offering guidance, advice and practical support for your health problems and needs. We basically talked about all things health and diet related. I had Sarah on because she has her own experience with health issues and growing out of those through investigating health, nutrition, all that sort of stuff, and she's come out with what would appear to be an unconventional approach to nutrition, which is quite similar to my own. And it's the kind of perspective that you're not going to hear if you stay on Instagram and you get all of your nutrition advice from gurus and Instagram. But I wanted to have her on to kind of hopefully give you some food for thought and give you a different perspective. On the outset, I wanted to kind of play a bit of a devil's advocate role with her, just to kind of voice the objections that most people would have to what she's saying. I'm not sure that I did a good enough job of that, to be honest, because it was quite hard to disagree with her because I agree with pretty much everything she had to say. So hopefully you got a sense of, hopefully you'll get a sense of that and kind of hearing any objections that you have, hearing me voice those. But we went through a lot of stuff. It's a bit over an hour. We could have gone on for another hour. I had questions planned and I couldn't get through all of them. I was conscious of time and keeping it as concise as possible. So if you have any questions, if you have something that you think we didn't address properly and you'd like to have it addressed, let us know, because we'll likely do another one of these and it'll be good to bring those questions and those objections or whatever it is to Sarah. But that's it. We went through, over an hour, some great stuff, a lot of thought-provoking stuff, and hopefully it's going to challenge you and hopefully get you to see a different perspective. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the show and I will see you at the end. So thanks for coming on, Sarah. Welcome. Like I said, we had a chat before, but just to kind of give the viewers a bit of an idea of who you are, could you give us basically a background of what you do, how you came to do what you do and all that?
Yes, of course. So I never sort of really know how to describe what I do because I guess part of that is because I don't like to be boxed in by descriptions. And I think, whenever I come up with something that sort of sounds relevant, it then begins to sound, well, it doesn't cover X or it doesn't cover Y. The nearest I've come to is that I'm a whole health coach, and I think even that leaves some areas of ambiguity. But basically, I guess my area of real interest is metabolic health. So, and we'll talk a bit more, I'm sure, as the program goes on about what that entails. But I'm interested in sort of root cause health. So, looking at people's symptoms, which are generally symptoms, and then working to, what's the cause of that and how can we improve the overall metabolism to address those issues. More recently, I've sort of become more interested in the functional and structural side of the body. I did a sports massage course last year, which I knew I would discard most of, but wanted to have that sort of basic, understanding so that I could work my own way. Just how did I get to where I am? About 8 years ago, I discovered the 4 R's, which I think is sort of the idiot sister of paleo, and is this kind of primal way of eating. Does it roam? Does it rot? Can you recognize it? Can you eat it raw? And after sort of an adult lifetime of dieting, on diets, off diets, fat, thin, and the whole kind of feast famine literally approach to dieting, it felt like a revelation to me. I also went through a hypnotherapy program in conjunction with this 4 R's thing. And I emerged from that with what I felt was, enlightenment. It was 2009. The weight literally dropped off me. I looked radiant. I felt great, and I really thought this is it. I found it, and I would preach at anybody I could get an audience with about, the perils of the industrial diet. And if you don't recognize an ingredient, nor does your body, blah, 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 all of those kind of things. And that was fine for, I would say, probably about 18 months. But after that, I began to display signs of fatigue, insomnia, anxiety, poor circulation, depression, terrible digestion. But even so, I soldiered on. Such was my commitment to this sort of lifestyle, that I soldiered on with this. When I got to, I think it was the beginning of 2012, things just weren't right. I'd got Raynaud's syndrome. I had a incidence of lichen planus on my leg, and really quite bad anxiety. And I went to the doctors for all of these things I'm mentioning. And all I got from them was, here's some steroid cream for that. The Raynaud's is, we don't know what to do about that. You just have to suck it up and live with it. And at the time, I was married, and I had signed up to an endurance cycling event with my then husband, because it was a sport that he liked, and I kind of thought if we could sort of do it together, then it would be good for the marriage. Anyway, I just had no motivation to train for this. It was 200 miles in 2 days, 100 miles a night in a tent, which sounded horrendous to me then, as it still does now, and then another 100 miles the next day. And I just had no, I would go out for a bike ride, and I'd done a bit of road cycling, and there were bits of it that I felt I enjoyed at the time, probably when I got enough adrenaline into my system to actually give me some energy. And I came across what felt like a chance encounter with a guy called Billy Craig on Twitter. And I sort of thought, he looks interesting. And I thought, I could go to him. And I was feeling a bit fat as well at the time. My clothes had begun to get a bit tighter. And so I had a sort of exchange with him on Twitter, and I started to work with him then. And I honestly thought, so deep was my disordered relationship with food. I honestly thought he'd put me on a diet, that was going to make me thin again, and also give me this energy to train for this endurance cycle ride that I didn't want to do. It was then, I guess I could talk for hours about it, but obviously it would be really boring to listen to. So I guess we'll pick up on it on the way through. But I just wanted to give I was firmly entrenched in this kind of clean eating thing. And then I began to work with Billy. I'm still working with him now, as you know, 6.5 years later. And I don't think I ever had a light bulb moment. I don't think I ever thought, oh my God, this is ridiculous. It was such an organic process. And that's what's been excellent about working with Billy, is that he was never, well, you should do this or you should do that. It was all about sort of self-discovery, if that doesn't sound too schmaltzy. And, so that, and then over the course of this 6.5 years, I've sort of worked on my own health. That's still an ongoing issue, or still an ongoing journey, I should say. I've left my highly pressurized, highly paid corporate job. I still do some consultancy, but in the main, this is now, what I do is to help people who, I guess, have got to a point in their life. I think if I had to do sort of a summary, I guess my clients are mainly female, late 30s, early 40s. And again, have got to a point like me where they're like, something's not right here. Something is just not right, whether that's their sleeping, their anxiety, their libido, their circulation, or just the inability to lose weight. So that's sort of, I think, hopefully I know I rambled a bit, but
no, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to bring it back to one thing you mentioned. So you're preparing for this. You'd started your kind of paleo-ish diet, and you felt great, but then things started to pile up, but you soldiered on. Can you talk a bit about what kind of rationalization you came up with at the time? What things were you telling yourself to keep you on that path?
Good question. I don't know whether it was really rationalization at the time or just blind. I mean, my cognitive function at that point was quite poor. I understand now why. You know, I literally had no glucose in my brain. My hypoglycemia was really quite severe. But I don't know whether I did have any rationalization. I didn't sort of, I did, what I definitely didn't have was a sort of a logical thinking of, okay, well, let's look at these, you know, like I said, the circulation, the sleep, the anxiety, the no libido. Let's look at all of those things and do maybe some research of my own. It was just, I don't know. There was not much conscious thought that went into piecing all of those things together, which obviously I now would do. It was just this must be the right thing, and then I think the sort of the clean eating thing had started to develop, and it was just. You know that there's a documentary going to be coming out from some guys about Ray Peats, one of the people in it, called On the Back of a Tiger. I think that title comes from a Russian, I think it's Russian, saying, which is, it's easier to climb on the back of a tiger than it is to get off of it. And I think that was it. I'd saddled up this entire lifestyle of, you know, clean eating and no gluten, no dairy, and loads of nuts and meat and all of that kind of thing. And I just don't think I knew how to extricate myself from it.
And would it be fair to say that, like you said, you're sort of immersed in that? Does that become part of your identity, and do you feel that's part of the issue?
100%.
You know, you see a person and you can tell that they are that kind of person and they espouse that information.
For sure. For absolute sure. I mean, to begin with, like I said, I guess I was dining out on the honeymoon period of this sort of 18, I can't remember if it was 18 months, but it was, you know, it was around a year and a half where I felt great and I looked great. And I just kept thinking, I guess, if I am more committed to it, or if I do it more properly, then I can get back to that kind of slender, healthy, glowing looking person. And definitely, yes, you know, part of my identity, I mentioned I was married at the time. His family used to call me the food police. You know, I was well known for my, you know, getting in on people's conversations to start lecturing them about things which I didn't really know about, but I'd read about, you know, and were obviously just dogmatic views that I had taken on board as my own. And yes, 100% that was part of my identity. And I think because it was probably the sort of the strongest identity I'd ever had, it was even more difficult to disentangle myself from it. Then, of course, at the same time, I went through the hypnotherapy and NLP training, so that I could, you know, be a proper like coach that altered people's minds and got them into the, you know, better way of living. So it grew arms and legs. You know, it started off with the food, but it just grew arms and legs. And like I said, ill or not, I just did not know how to. Or even actually, I didn't have the motivation to extricate myself from it either. And I think that when I speak to some clients now, I've just finished working with a client actually, and she actually said to me, we talked a lot about, you know, she came to me and she had a lot of views about processed food and, you know, the perils of processed food in the diet. I think she followed a lot of Weston A. Price's principles. And throughout our conversations, you know, I never said, well, you should eat processed foods or whatever, but obviously I'm going to question people's sort of ideas and their principles when they come to me. And during one of the conversations when I said, well, how do you qualify a processed food? You know, how do you qualify a processed food? And she wasn't really able to do that. But what she did say to me is, if getting well involves eating processed foods, then I'd rather stay sick. I mean, that was the strength, and that, you know, I haven't even made that up for creative. That is literally what she said. And I think there's such a I mean, even more so now than there was in 2009 when I was doing the 4 R's thing. There is such a cult around this whole Coca-Cola, sugar, processed foods, sadly, probably not focusing on the real villains of the piece, because it's all about the sugar and the process. I mean, what does processed foods even mean? I've never even met anybody who can actually define to me what processed food is.
Yeah, and that's something I'd like to get into, sort of specific foods. But just going back to, you mentioned your cognitive function. So I asked, how were you rationalizing your decisions? And you said you weren't so much rationalizing them, but what does that look like? So presumably someone who's going through this it's not that they're stupid, that that they're lacking cognitive function, but what does that actually look like? Is it an inability to challenge ideas? Is it...
I think always now I'm going back to the base biological reasons, and you don't have to call somebody stupid. I recognise that's a really sensitive sort of area. However, if your diet is low in usable energy, your brain will not be getting, or it's highly likely your brain won't be getting sufficient energy, and that impacts your brain function. That's as simple as it was. I wasn't stupid, but nor I don't think are a lot of people following these diets, but our ability to look, objectively and logically at patterns or gigantic signs from our body that it really is not happy at all, they're just not there. Because I suppose, on top of, like I said, if we go back to the base biological things, all the rest of it is sort of intellectual, which is fine if the biology is correct. So if your brain has enough energy, it can function properly. I talk to, when I even do some sort of self-analysis now, I can't, recognize the difference between myself in 2011 and my dogmatic going on to people about what was right and what was wrong. Anybody I could get involved in a spat with, and then that was good for that. So I think I know that I know what you're saying, and people might take the implication that we are saying they're stupid. That's not it. Yeah. But if you don't have enough energy in your brain, you can't make those. And also, our culture doesn't lend itself to patterns, and it's like, oh, you've got genetic bad luck, you've got ulcerative colitis. That's just a sad genetic misfortune. Oh, you've got lichen planus, or that's another autoimmune issue, but it's not related in any way. It's just another thing. Here's some steroid cream to get rid of that. Here's some sleeping pills to fix your sleeping issues. Here's some antidepressants for your depression, stroke, anxiety. So I definitely think that's what it is, and that's why I guess the approach I take now, and I've been fortunate to learn with Billy, because that's been his approach, is all biology upwards. Because if you come at this from a talking therapy perspective, you can only ever intellectualize that. It's like I was talking to a client the other day, and I was saying, when I take Stan out for a walk, he's my dog, there's a field and it's got 3 rams in it, and he gets up to the gate and he barks and barks and barks at them, and in the end he doesn't really know what he's barking at. Now, me telling him to calm down in the middle of that is literally pointless, because he can't, he's so excitable that he wouldn't hear that. Trying to tell somebody to relax, meditate, eat properly, all of those things, when their cells are in such a state of disarray, which is what hypoglycemia or insufficient energy can cause, is the same. It's pointless. It's why I don't really favour talking therapy. I mean, I think there's room for that. I think as long as you're working in conjunction with fixing the biological issues.
Yeah. Okay. And so I suppose one thing that might be important to do now is to even define health, because you talked initially about how you were preparing for this 100 kilometer per day race, and someone would say, well, if you can do that, then you're healthy. But maybe you have a different definition of health. How would you define health? What does that look like, and what markers should someone look for?
So I think first of all, it's important to differentiate between fitness and health. So, I think that, fitness people, I know lots of people who are running marathons, or like myself at the time, always doing spin classes, endurance cycling. I would say that thing half killed me. I would say that I was absolutely in the gutter for at least 2 weeks afterwards. However, I think people can be fit, but they can be unhealthy. So, in terms of cardiovascular fitness, for example, people, I think, athletes are very often, they look fit, they can run forever, but their metabolism has dialed down. So the things I look for myself, and of course this is individual, I'm not prescribing that these are, the be all and end all, but the things that I look for in my own health and in my clients are: what's their temperature, what's their waking temperature, internal, base temperature, what is their heart rate. Then, so they're obviously specific markers that can be easily measured and tracked. The other things I look for are probably a bit more subjective, but again, how people are sleeping, how people are, their digestion, how they're eliminating, how often, how effectively, how good they feel after elimination, what their mood is like, what their libido is like. Those are the things which I think are, again, going back to what I said, my area of interest is definitely around metabolic health. And those for me are, the bigger sort of indicators of whether somebody is healthy. Because I think, like I said, you can be fit, you can be running marathons. But actually, if you look at, I know some people who are into endurance sports, but you look at them and they don't look, they've got, they're lacking in vitality. I spend a lot of time looking at people, obviously, and I will look at things like where their eyes are focusing. Have they got colour to their skin? Have they got a receding hairline? Have they got definition to their jaw? All of these things, and the reason I'm saying, these are contextual and they're individual, is that I suppose I can put those together. And then when I start working with a client, they go through a questionnaire, which is Billy's questionnaire, and it's extensive. And it comes out with a top 4 priority areas for their health concerns, which might be adrenals, it might be liver, it might be thyroid. And then that, in conjunction with their own subjective assessment of how they're sleeping, how happy they are, how their libido is, how their digestion is, etc. And then I look at the things that, if I'm FaceTiming with somebody, I'm looking for those things. I describe how they're sat, and like I said, whether they're focusing, where their gaze is, whether they have colour in their cheeks, whether they have bad skin, whether they're nervous, whether I can see them kind of, fidgeting, hotching about from side to side. All of those things, obviously, are tiny bits of a jigsaw. I don't think I have one cookie cutter that says, this is what you need to look at, because it's also individual dependent.
Okay. And excuse me, the question I had, I've blanked on my question now. So you're saying that you look at all these things and you can visually see health in a person. Is that different from what someone would see on Instagram in some sort of fitness model who, by common standards, is beautiful, if you know what I mean? I do. Is the standard that you're looking for different?
Totally.
Are you using a different lens?
I'm totally using a different lens. Yeah. I think, because if you see a fitness model on Instagram, for example, they might be thin, but actually we don't know how much of their makeup is body fat and how much is muscle tissue. And that obviously is an indicator of health or ill health. We don't know how much makeup they've used. We don't know all of those things that I'm talking about. Are they having sex? Are they wanting to have sex? Are they? Is their digestion good? Are they, sleeping okay? Are they getting up? Do they like their life? what I've found, both in terms of my own health and in terms of some of the clients I work with, is the more visible people are on Instagram with their, hands on hips, chest out, shoulders back poses, there's often a correlation between that kind of presented faux, everything's amazing in my world perception than there is if you sat down with some of those Instagram models with no makeup on, and like I said, you looked at them critically and you got them to answer a series of questions. I think, I'm not saying in 100% of cases, but I think the truth is often, the two things definitely are very different. What does somebody look like, and what are they projecting via their social media versus what's going on in their real life? I mean, that definitely was the case for me in 2012. I was flying all over the world. I had a highly successful, well, depending on what your definition of success is, but financially successful career. But inside I was dead. I knew that I was dead. I mean, I didn't know how to address it. I didn't know how to fix it. Even when I met Billy, I didn't go to him and think, oh, he'll make me happier. I thought he'll make me thinner. That's my original sort of motivation. So I now, I sort of observe my own behaviour on social media, and I see the change in the last 6 years. I'm less present. I'm, less. I find it less necessary to sort of post lots of posts of where I am, largely because I don't really go anywhere. And sitting indoors and reading the functional medicine manual doesn't really make for such a good selfie as being in a bar in London. But my life is much more content.
Yeah. And so would you say it's fair to say that a lot of what we define as health comes from media, from, like, there's no actual... we never really agreed that kale shakes were good and that whatever, it just sort of happened and everyone just took it as the truth. So most people will believe that a kale shake or something like that is healthy, and these things are proven to be healthy. Where would you begin to, or how would you begin to challenge that in someone? Why is your way more accurate when everyone else is doing this way? And I know that's a fallacy, but it's,
I think it's a good question. I mean, I think it's going to seem like a slightly obtuse answer, but it doesn't mean to be for any other reason that I'm never trying to convince anybody that my way, I guess because I don't actually have a way. I think that's probably the key thing, is I don't have a way. I guess I would consider that I'm a conduit between, what is out there and somebody who's lost but wants to change. I don't ever, just to your point there, how would I convince somebody that they shouldn't be drinking kale shakes? I wouldn't. I think, and going back to my own experience, if somebody had told me I shouldn't be drinking Alpro and eating 12 almonds for my mid-morning break in 2012, I probably would have, broken their nose. Such was my hypoglycemia-driven angst. However, I definitely wasn't ready to hear any of the things that were, an alternative. And you see that all the time. I sometimes get into Twitter or social media debates, but with people, not where I'm trying to say this is what you should do, but if somebody's making claims, I do take exception to that. So, we're living in a world where sugar is demonized, yet unsaturated fats are, freely available and even encouraged. So if somebody's claiming something like sugar causes cancer or fizzy drinks cause cancer, which is quite common on social media, then I will get into debates with people like that on the basis that, can you qualify this statement? I don't go into there and say you're wrong and this is, you should drink Coke, because again, that's all highly contextual. For somebody who's in fatty acid metabolism, for example, if they suddenly had a diet that was high in glucose, their body isn't going to know what to do with it. It's going to cause them all kinds of problems. It took me a long time to get from my sort of fat and protein based diet to one that was, higher in carbohydrates and feel good on it. So where do these things come from? Well, I guess the problem is that because, again, going back to this cognitive function, because people who don't have a good energy supply to the brain are looking for somebody else to be a guru because it's easier. And again, I'm not judging. I did that That was what my whole life was based on, because it's easier if you can have somebody who says, I know the way, follow me, do my thing, I'll show you, and it's guaranteed, and this is the reasons behind it. If enough people subscribe to that, which they do because they're hungry, they're tired, they want to lose weight, they don't want to do the investigation themselves, then it just becomes an incontrovertible truth.
Yeah.
And that sadly is how health fads go. But I don't know if you're probably too young to remember the saturated fat debacle of the 80s. I was like 10 when that happened, and I can remember we went from having a butter dish and butter through to having that horrendous Flora Gold, St. Ives Gold, which was absolutely disgusting. But we did that, my family did that on the basis of government guidelines. And, now it's all becoming apparent that there's actually nothing wrong with saturated fat. Again, contextually, as long as that's not all you're eating, then there's, and as long as there are other things which aren't an issue, then that's fine. But I think, I guess I always think, well, I aim to be provocative, as you know, that's my approach to social media. And I always figure that my market is tiny, as a, real niche market of people but I think my clients and people who interact with me and potential clients, they're already started to think, actually, something's not stacking up here. If they're deep in the clutches of paleoism, then I think you just got to leave them to get on with it, because we can't fix the world. And if someone's not ready to hear that, they're just not ready to hear it.
Yeah. So the people who come to you typically, do they have at least one foot into the door of this kind of thinking, or do you have to do a lot of convincing? I know you say you're not trying to convince people, but do you come up against a lot of resistance?
No, I don't. I think by the time people come to me, I would say, if somebody hasn't found me via social media, then we have a different kind of conversation. But I don't convince. I even have like an aid memoir that I've produced, which says, this is how I work. This is not what, you're not going to get spoon-fed from me. This will be hard work. If you're not ready to have your beliefs challenged, I would suggest we're not ready to work together. Because I figured a long time ago that it's better for me to have a small number of clients who are ready. Even the clients that get to me still, I think, want to be, or some of the clients still want to be fixed, and they're not going to be. That it's going to take a long time, a lot of effort. It's hard work. I think it's a bit like the cha-cha. You like 2 steps forward, 2 to the side. I don't know what the technical arrangement of that exactly. Sometimes it feels like you're going forward, and sometimes it feels like you're going backward. But what I've sort of learned through my own journey, as awful as that expression is that is life, isn't it? Sometimes it's good and forward moving, and sometimes it's awful, and there's no amount of carbs or metabolic robustness can protect us from the fact that sometimes life is really quite difficult. And I always just hope that if clients come to me, I don't, and again, I'm not also, I suppose, I'm not looking for a sort of a big following. I'm not looking for people that say, oh, Sarah says, or Sarah does. If I can inspire somebody to live their own life, and I can help them by saying, well, have you tried this, or have you thought about that? Then that's a good outcome for me. I don't want a load of people running, I don't want to create another even mini paleo world, but with a different. Yeah. And I think that's what's happened in the Ray Peat community. Absolutely, is that he's just been held up, he's misinterpreted, he's misrepresented. People go on forums dishing out advice willy-nilly based on something he may have once said to one individual, and that's I purposely stay outside of the communities because of that, and I find it so dysfunctional. And often people have just replaced paleo or veganism with a Ray Peat diet that he probably never even said was a diet.
I know, I see a lot of that. So I was thinking we could maybe go through, like we mentioned, we kind of laughed off kale as being bad, but again, someone listening to this is going to think, well, obviously kale is great because it's green and it's got fiber and it's got all sorts of things and it tastes awful. So how would you why might kale not be as great as we think? Can you answer that?
Well, I think, I guess again, if we look at the sort of the energy around why might not any one thing be as great as it might be. So I think kale is held up as a superfood. I think that for a start is enough reason to question, is it, and to start to get under the skin of why is it held up as a superfood? And like you said, because it's green, because it tastes vile, and because it's trendy, and enough people have said that it is. I try and stay out of sort of specific where you should eat this or you shouldn't eat that, as you know. But I would say with kale, it's horrible. And, we are built with the most amazing biofeedback mechanism that people just ignore. Like, kids are a really great barometer for food, aren't they? What baby do you like there? You often see kids trying to shove the mushed up broccoli in the child's face, and they just don't like it because it's horrible. And that, taste should be a good... It is horrible. I don't care what anybody says. I've got friends who try and convince me they like it. I simply don't believe them, because what is there to like about it? I don't know. I could think of things which probably I would say I wouldn't eat just because they might not be the best for me, but are nice. I don't know, donuts, for example. But kale is just horrible, and I think that in itself is just enough reason, irrelevant of whether it's kale or whether it's, I don't know, I can't think of another thing which is just not very nice, but that we're told. Almonds, I mean, really, they're disgusting. They're hard, they probably irritate our gut, they're just not very nice. And I just think taste is a really good measure of should we be eating something, and enjoyment. Do we like it? And I bet if you would have no way of knowing, because people would say they did like their kale smoothies, but if you could some way get into like a lie detector test type thing and ask 100 people having kale smoothies whether they enjoyed them, I'm fairly sure really 100 of them would say, if they had to, they don't want.
And so you mentioned that children, they have a good barometer for these things. But for example, I can't stand the taste of liver, but I think we'd both agree that liver is a healthy food to have. Is there something more to it when we account for maybe that one person who does, maybe they're a sadist and they love kale for some reason? Is there something we can point to that's accounts for that?
Well, I mean, I'm not a fan of this approach, because again, I think it can sort of be taken out of context. But if I was really drawn on the green vegetable thing, it would be, especially raw vegetables. I suppose what we all ignore is that vegetables grow and they have to have a defense mechanism to protect them against predators in the same way that everything does. And what vegetables have is cellulose and all sorts of kind of anti-nutrients, which can be damaging to the metabolism of the predator. Now, that might not be such a problem if they are really well cooked. And I think there might be something around vitamin K in really well boiled greens, but raw, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. Okay. I mean, just on the basis of those things. I think just going back to your point around liver, this is one that I often sort of, mull over. I really like liver. Calves, I'm not keen on anything else, but really good quality veal liver, quickly fried in coconut oil, salt and pepper. I really like it. However, I think sometimes, and again, this is what our sort of culture, I think, predisposes us to. If you don't love it, I always say to my clients, if you don't love it, just don't have it, because I think you can get what you need to from something else. And I think the stress of cramming, I seen in the past all sorts of things, soak it in milk, mince it up, mix it with this, douse it in the other. And I think if you're going to those lengths to eat something on the basis that you feel is healthy, there's something wrong. It's it just feels counterintuitive. I think because for me, who ate that awful 4 hours diet for so long, I really do feel strongly about the enjoyment of food. So, one of my things with clients will always be, as it was with when I first started working with Billy, I was eating things like pizzas and things. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say they're the best things for us to eat now. I think, relevant of whether you're gluten-free, darling, I think gluten, and grain is not great for us. However, if you're coming from a position of saying, I don't eat this, I don't eat that, I'm gluten-free, I'm dairy-free, I don't eat processed foods or whatever that means, then I think part of the sort of therapy alongside the biological fixing of issues is how do we change some of the mindset around that. And that's almost like fill your boots, eat the pizza, eat McDonald's, whatever it is, because we have to get somebody who's really deep in the clutches of clean eating and, like me, would rather starve than eat something that wasn't on their sort of approved list. That's some fairly dysfunctional behaviour. And one of the first sort of real things I learned with Billy is that all food is food. And that just sounds so trite when I say it now. But at the time, it was revelatory. I mean, I was working in India a lot at the time, and I would get up in the morning and have my breakfast there, and I would not eat again until I was in the hotel at night. We're talking about 13 or 14 hours apart, not because I was stuck up about, being dirty or whatever, but because it was not, I wasn't able to get what I deemed was okay food. So that whole, if you're stuck, if you've backed yourself into a cul-de-sac of I won't eat this, I won't eat that, and I won't eat the other, what happens when that's all there is to eat? People are going to choose nothing. Often that's what's happening now. People will choose nothing because they have, like we talked about, created their whole identity around this, I don't eat that. And it's sort of, it's really dysfunctional.
Yeah. And I suppose this might be a good time to go into the idea of fasting and where the shortcomings with fasting might be, because, for example, you said, well, I'd have my breakfast and then I wouldn't eat until 14 hours later, and someone listening might think, oh, brilliant, you're doing intermittent fasting and you've got, you're giving your digestive organs a break to regenerate and do all sorts of things. So what do you think is the issue with that sort of thinking?
I think, I guess the issue with that kind of thinking is the same as the, kale smoothies are great and the processed food is bad, is that the science behind intermittent fasting seems questionable. I guess for people with thyroid problems, then there is often an issue with endotoxin in the gut. So it would seem that actually the intermittent fasting could provide a rest for the organs, and it definitely means that there is not so much food sitting around in the gut and festering, which is sort of the basis of endotoxin. However, all of that's fine if you can just isolate the gut, for example, but you can't. And, if you look at intermittent fasting, then what's going to happen, or what is probably going to happen, is that people are going to end up running on stress hormones. Our body was not meant to be starved for 16 or 18 hours. And I don't think it can do that without stress hormones being involved somewhere along the line, especially. So if you look at somebody who is healthy, and I mean healthy in the metabolism sense of the word, then they may be able to sustain a period of fasting, because their liver will be adept at storing glycogen, releasing it back to them as their body needs it, which is the basis of energy. However, I don't know many people who are in that state to start with. And then if you consider that being in that state is going to further exacerbate their poor liver health, then it seems like I guess it's a bit like turning off your burglar alarm. If you live in a high crime area and you switch off your burglar alarm, then you're not going to get any notifications of burglars breaking in, but it doesn't mean that they're not breaking in anymore. I think that's the problem with, or that's one of the problems with intermittent fasting. I think for me, then the other issue is that behaviorally, it creates this dysfunctional, obsessive relationship with food, which again, you can't have that. And I speak from experience, of my own experience, and from working with clients. You can't have that without the energy that goes with that, which is, oh no, I've created this. Have created this identity, this persona now, this intermittent fasting. And where that kind of energy exists, you've got this sort of myopically focused energy. And I think that is both a cause and an effect of health issues in itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And just to sort of go back to, you mentioned metabolism from a point of view of healthy metabolism. Maybe we should clarify what that is, because I think some people might assume that a healthy metabolism is one that's almost slow and efficient. So how would you define a healthy metabolism?
A good
Is it
question.
Fast? Is it slow? Or?
I mean, it's not. It's functional. Again, I recognise that some of these answers may sound a bit obtuse, but I think a normal metabolism, well functioning, the things I spoke of earlier, I guess, the regular elimination, the healthy digestion, the good sleep, the good libido, all of those things I think are indicators. Can I just stop a minute, Paul?
Yeah, sure.
Do you mind? My dog's going absolutely insane, and I don't know why. Just bear with me one minute.
We'll pause there.
So, just to your point, healthy metabolism. Yeah, I think neither short nor slow. The indicators I mentioned earlier, libido, elimination, mood, sleep, I think are all of the only the most general I'd be prepared to sort of discuss. I think there's such a lot of scientific evidence now between a correlation of a slowed metabolism and degenerative diseases, that I think if we shifted our gaze away from the Instagram, idea of beautiful, then I think we'd all be a lot healthier.
Okay. And a lot of people will point to things like ketogenic diets and intermittent fasting as being beneficial for things like epilepsy or all sorts of issues. Is it just that they are cherry picking the data, or is it just that it's solving a small issue temporarily for them, therefore they're sort of bought into the idea? What do you think is going on?
I think it's a raft of things. I think those things that you've just said. I think, again, if you look at epilepsy, I would always be looking at and I guess irrelevant actually of whether it's epilepsy, with everything I work on is looking at, okay, well, what are the root causes? What's going on at a systemic level, which is causing epileptic fits, which I think is, can be largely attributed to high serotonin levels. What's going on. So with all of these things, like I guess the 4Rs did for me, I think, is it reduced my immune activity. Sorry, I couldn't find the word. My immune activity so much, I think, because my metabolism cranked down so much. So on reflection, I can see that I had a slow metabolism. I was gaining weight. My sleep was bad, etc., etc. However, my skin, I had like a perfect complexion, which is probably a result of higher estrogen, which obviously plumps out our skin, and also reduced vitamin requirements, from a slowed metabolism. And so I think I kind of lost my train of thought actually now. What was the...
So I was just wondering, I think you've essentially answered it. It's this idea that you're running on less, therefore the analogy I always use is if you've got two cars with identical imperfections, if you run one for 1,000 kilometers and the other for 100, the 1,000-kilometer one is going to show up problems, not because it has more imperfections, but because it's just been running more
for longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, I guess the thing with a reduced metabolism is that on the face of it, it can look really good. Like I said, my complexion was great, but it's the finer, as always, it's the devil is in the detail. And I think then when you do find out, that's what I was talking about. I was talking about ulcerative colitis. So post my So I think with paleo, my metabolism reduced so much that there was not really much of anything going on, not much immune activity, not much sort of cortisol activity. When I started to fix my health, I would guess probably maybe 8 months, 10 months after that, I started having even more digestive problems than I'd ever had. And not long after that, I had a diagnosis of ulcerative colitis. So I think things can present themselves when you start to fix your metabolism and things start to switch on, which I think is, a good analogy, is that then the problems can begin to emerge that your reduced metabolism had sort of almost masked. But I think the problem, I guess, with discovering that the reduced metabolism is causing a problem or is hiding a problem is that by the time it presents itself, it's often very big. So we're talking about, the autoimmune cancers, other degenerative issues, MS, Parkinson's, that kind of. So by the time people have, established that there is an issue, often I know lots of people who talk about, Dave down the road, he keeled over. He was so fit and healthy. That is such a common, someone's talking about someone who's been diagnosed with cancer. It's not fair, it's bad luck, it's fate. And I always get into this debate with people because I think people think I'm saying that the person that gets it deserved it, but that definitely isn't what I'm saying. I don't, we're told that we should put our trust in authorities, and that's obviously what most people do. However, according to me, there's no mystery about cancer presenting itself. It's a systemic issue that grows and develops, and over a long period of time. It's not just everything's ticking along fine and then boom, one night, overnight you develop this tumor, and that's not, that isn't how it works.
So it's not random, it's that we're not accounting for the variables that are relevant. because we're looking at things through the wrong lens.
That's right.
So would it be fair to say that people who get benefits from things like intermittent fasting, from ketogenic diets, it might be a short-term benefit, but it will eventually catch up to them? Because my sort of, I'm obviously generally entirely in agreement with you, but I try to challenge my thinking. And I was listening to a podcast recently where they had one ketosis proponent and another who wasn't as into ketosis, and the sort of consensus was do what works for you, but the other guy didn't say that ketosis was bad. He just said that, if it works for you, it works for you. Would you be of the opinion that it will eventually become bad? Or...
it depends. Again, it sounds like I'm a politician when I answer these things, or don't answer them. I would be interested in the individual circumstances, how long that person had been doing that diet, because ketosis can mean a myriad of things to different people, as we know. What was he actually doing? What results was he getting? How long had he been doing it? What conditions had he had? What were they at now? Be looking at the other markers I've talked about, basal temperature, heart rate. Would probably do an RMR test with that person to see where their metabolic rate was at. So rather than, I try not to say, this diet is good, this diet is bad, because it is so individually dependent. And often I think I was just catching up on some incident on Twitter before we spoke. And there's this guy on there who's become a fan of the low carb, high fat diet, and he's developed this group called Simple as Fat. He's got a lot of followers, and he doesn't have any qualifications to do that, and yet he's doling out, diet and health and nutrition advice, including, eat pork scratchings. The more you eat, the more fat you will burn. And one of the things that I noticed, I questioned him and he blocked me. All I asked for was, can you share the evidence on which you're basing this? Because he was beyond talking about his own personal experience, and he was making claims. He blocked me, and I went onto the Facebook page, and he had got a lot of followers on there, and there were people on there who were saying, I've been doing this diet for 2 weeks and I've lost loads of weight. And it really reminded me of how caught in the weight and appearance trap we really are. And appearances, I definitely think you can look at somebody critically, as we've already discussed, but probably not through the lens that the majority of people are looking critically. But weight, is such a misguided measure of anything. I would think I'm probably about, I don't know because I don't weigh myself, but I would say I'm probably about 1.5 stone, 2 stone heavier maybe than I was 6 or 7 years ago. But I don't care about that. I don't, because I'm happy that all of the indicators I keep talking about are showing overall upward progress. And B, what does it actually mean? I probably got more muscle tone than I had. I was the living definition of skinny fat. I was probably wearing a size 10 jeans, but my body fat percentage was something like 38, 39, I think. So, but we are obsessed with that, what the scales say, and do people look thinner? And all over social media, I still see comments from women to women, often like, "You look tiny," and that's a that is a compliment. And it's a sad sort of reflection, I think, of where we're at in terms of whether people are just going back to one of your first questions about, what's the difference between sort of health and fitness, beauty, and our compass is way off.
And do you believe that it's just again, a different lens, or that it's entirely a subjective thing? Because I think some people will say, well, there are beauty standards and evolutionarily whatever. I don't know the arguments, but I know that there would be some sort of disagreement with that.
With what, though?
With the idea that, I suppose, someone being overweight, we'll say, that being absolutely an unhealthy thing, and that we evolutionarily will not go for someone who is, say, obese, because that would imply that they are unhealthy, and that's a hardwired response. Do you think that the way you're approaching it is purely subjective? Whatever you think of yourself is the truth, or it's something objective but just a different perspective, if that makes sense?
It does. I think there's a couple of things here. First of all, if somebody was arguing with me about the obesity equals poor health, again, I would ask them to bring me the evidence. I think Billy and I did a podcast on this a while ago, actually, on the basis of what's that model's name? There was a plus size model who did the front cover of Cosmopolitan. I can't think what her name is now. It caused absolute uproar. Some people were like, yay for the empowered woman, and other people like, this is as bad as putting an anorexic girl. That was one that was quite common. And I think that if you look at our assessment of obesity, it definitely seems to be a visual cultural thing. Obviously in some societies, and also in some generations, even in Western society, big was a good thing because it symbolized richness and fullness. Same, I think, still in some cultures in different countries now. But I think one of the things that we unearthed through that podcast is that the whole obesity epidemic has been something that has been sort of created partly because of a change in the measurement of obesity overnight, which caused a colossal rise in obesity. But if you try and find the science that correlates obesity and health problems, it's often difficult to find because it's not there. And there might be some, I don't know, you could possibly infer that if somebody was obese and they came from a certain socioeconomic background and they had a certain diet, then you could perhaps, and they had a certain lifestyle, then perhaps there might be a propensity to disease. But I don't think we can necessarily say that obesity causes cancer or it causes whatever, all of the other things, because actually the science doesn't appear to exist, or that's my understanding. I think with regard to the health thing, like I said, if I look at my own example, that removes any sort of controversy, then I have much more life, I have much more energy, I have much more vitality, I'm more interesting, I'm more intelligent, that those are things that I sort of know to be true than when I was size 10, boring, you would go on about what I could eat, what I wouldn't eat, wouldn't go to dinner at friends' houses, or if I did, would take my own food with me. Those things, nobody would have been interested in me at that point, to be honest, because I probably would have bored them to death. So from I guess I'd like to get into a debate with somebody that said from an evolutionary perspective. I think the what's the word I'm looking for? I think the definition of beauty is so well entrenched in our culture, through the media, through society, through absolutely everything, that I think people probably would say the same as you, or the same as you're saying for argument's sake, but I'm not sure whether that can be actually substantiated. I'm not sure. And then if you equate that to, health beyond looks. So when somebody comes to work with me, I'm not ever really interested in how heavy they are. And actually, I guess some people do come to me and say, I'd like to lose weight, but in the end, that always becomes a sub issue, because I think it always is a sub issue.
Yeah.
And weight is such a pointless measure. I mean, I don't necessarily consider that I'm obese or even overweight, and I don't think I was underweight previously, but it's just not something. It's not something that's on my radar, I guess.
Okay, so for you, the bottom line is going to be the health of the metabolism. So those markers, regardless of the weight itself. Now, do you think that it's possible for metabolic markers to be great when someone is morbidly obese? You know, whatever that means exactly.
I'm not sure whether I can answer that. I think if somebody was obese, I think there are other markers which would be probably more relevant. So we'd then be looking at maybe more sophisticated, like lactate levels, for example, which can be more indicative of whether a disease is around the corner, I guess, than from the other things. I can't answer that. I just don't have a frame of reference around I think those are always, I mean, I'm not saying, I just want to say again for clarity, I'm not saying those are the only things, and obviously dependent on what the person is presenting with, there will be other things to test. I think I've touched on the RMR test. That's always a really good measure of where somebody is at from a health perspective, because if they have a low RMR, then we know, irrelevant of their heart rate, temperature and everything else, we know that their metabolism is compromised, and that not only with regard to leanness or weight or whatever you want to call it, that will probably go on to cause, or can potentially go on to cause, other problems later on in life.
Okay, great. No, that's, I think not being able to answer and being upfront about that gives a sort of answer in itself, and it gives food for thought. So I'm just conscious of time. I might begin to wrap up. I wanted to touch on sugar, just because that's the big one. That's the one that everyone, that's the consensus, that sugar is toxic and you'll die if you look at it. So what's the issue with sugar as far as you're concerned?
I guess the sugar thing is a bit like the kale thing, but just from the flip side of the coin, you know. So where the kale thing has been like eat it, the sugar thing has become, again, it's grown arms and legs. And I think when you get people who are saying sugar causes cancer, which is quite common thing, and you ask them to substantiate it, they will refer you to people like Gary Taubes, they will refer you to people like Lustig, but people are they're not able to produce the science because the science doesn't exist. Then people start to produce studies. If that happens, then it's a multifactorial study that will talk about, high diets which are maybe high in carbohydrates, but those carbohydrates might be grains, and it might be high in polyunsaturated fats as well. It's just one of those things that has just been said so often, and the whole industry has grown around it. You look at Jamie Oliver, look at Davina McCall. People are literally dining out on the back of demonizing sugar, and that's really quite scary. And again, I'm happy through my own research, but primarily through my own experience of my life when I was, I don't eat sugar, although would sink a few bottles of wine and sort of compensatory behaviours way at the weekend. I was, really quite sick, and my sugar levels in my body were incredibly low. And when your body is forced to produce sugar for itself, which I think people don't realise. I think people, and again, this was how I used to think myself, is that you can stop giving your body sugar and it will literally use your fat stores to survive. I think that's one of the reasons that low carb, high fat has become so common, because it sounds so sexy, doesn't it? You know, you stop eating sugar, your body will use its fat, you'll be thin. Absolutely brilliant. However, because our body needs sugar to survive, if you don't give it the sugar, then it's forced to make its own. And the problem with that is that on making its own, it's inefficient and it creates a lot of waste products, which are also problematic, lactic acid, for example. And I think it's really hard to sort of, again, without me saying sugar is great, you should eat it, which is definitely not what I would ever say, because again, it depends on the individual. And if somebody comes to me and their diet, they're already living the low carb, high fat diet. If I suddenly started saying, okay, cook some apples, eat those, have them with maple syrup, their body would not be able to deal with that. It would just cause so many problems. Yeah. So without saying, I think if you strip it back to its bare bones, our body survives on glucose. We get energy from energy, and energy comes from glucose, not really from fat or protein. If you force your body to get energy from fat, it's incredibly inefficient and it comes with a consequence. And so I think people have just got to come to that, and when you see that whole industries have been built on this, cookbook industries and, Jamie Oliver, who seems to be in a quest to sort of take over the world with his dietary advice, yet is still happy, I'm assuming, to make his desserts in his restaurants and, peddle those. It's not that bad. It's just scary, but only because it's another dietary dogma that's come in, grown arms and legs, and now just goes along unquestioned. I mean, even the government guidelines for how much sugar you should have, no one's ever questioning, where have they come from and why? And the dogma behind the anti-sugar cult, and that's all I can refer to it as, is really strong.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things that people just need to sort of dip their toes in and get to eventually, because the funny thing is, you mentioned that if you don't get sugar, your body's going to produce it itself. People will spin that to suit their needs, because they'll say carbohydrates aren't necessary because your body will just manufacture it itself. So they've got all sorts of strategies to kind of rationalize that.
They have, but I think the way of steering clear of needing to deal with those strategies is just to bring the science to play. So, yes, your body will make sugar itself. However, often it makes too much. Diabetes, step forward, and often it will create waste products as a result of that, which are implicated in long-term health issues.
So, again, sugar isn't the issue, it's the body's inability to either process it or cope with not having it.
Absolutely.
It's really underlying issues that we're dealing with.
Yes.
I know people will always say, donuts are bad for you, they're full of sugar, but they're donuts. There's a million other things in there.
A million other things, not least of all, they're fried in, crappy unsaturated fat.
Yeah.
And I think that's often the problem, is that people confuse carbohydrates. They think that bread is carbohydrate, and of course it is, but actually the main component of bread is not really a simple carbohydrate. It's grains and unsaturated fats often.
Yeah. And do you have time to quickly touch upon polyunsaturated fats?
Yes, I'm not in any kind of rush. So
the common wisdom is polyunsaturated fats, things like fish oils, flax, olive oil, all that sort of stuff. Is the consensus is that it's absolutely healthy. The debate is over as far as people will be concerned. How would you challenge that?
Again, I would be telling people to, not look at Google, where you can get any kind of wacky thing. As long as it's got enough hits, it will be at the top. I would encourage people to look at the science, behind what happens with polyunsaturated fats, the immune suppressant nature of them, the inflammatory nature of them. Now, you're not going to get that from Google because there is an industry which is worth absolutely gazillions. So that kind of information is not easy to find. You have to look a bit harder. And I think that is, that's what often puts people off, going back to the not having enough brain energy to think clearly. Also, that plays out in people aren't going to look for difficult. They want mainly, if you do this, X will happen. If you don't do that, then Y will happen. And I understand that, but you've got to look a bit more. And just remember that if ever you're reading something on Google, that's probably been bankrolled by somebody who's got some skin in that game. And therefore, I think it's good to try and seek out what is the actual science, behind polyunsaturated fats. Why do they cause inflammation? Why do they interfere with the metabolism? Why do they encourage estrogen? Why do they suppress the immune function? And I would encourage people to do that research themselves.
And when you mention Google, would you include the Google Scholar search function in that, or do you just mean like searching on the internet? Because the research that would demonstrate that polyunsaturated fats are inflammatory and immune suppressant, would they still show up on Google Scholar through whatever research paper, or are they being suppressed at that level?
I don't know is the honest answer to that question. I really don't know. I think the overriding thing for me is that you have to search for these things. And I think if ever you've got somebody who is reducing something to a really simple, and that's why so many of your questions I've asked, and I feel like a politician. Because I'm like, because you can't, it's complex, biology is complex and life is complex. And I think if ever you've got anybody who says, just do this and this will happen, you've got to really question the integrity of that person, because, it's reductionist and life often isn't that way. Biology isn't that way.
So with that in mind, how are there maybe one or two things that an average person could begin to measure to infer some sort of information, or something they could try that would be a first step towards the content you've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I would say invest in a thermometer, download a heart rate app. I think that's always a really good starting place, and that one is often met with like eye rolls. It's too simple and obviously might seem counter to what I've just said. However, the complexity with that comes with, it's not always what it seems on the face of it. So I sometimes have clients who say to me, my pulse is 80 and my temperature's 37, everything's good. And I'm like, well, what was it after you've eaten? How do you feel? Using those other things I've spoken about a few times, because it's always in context. So when you've taken your heart rate and pulse when you wake up, it's then a good idea to take it again 30 minutes after you've eaten. And what happens after you've eaten can often indicate the presence of stress hormones, or it can indicate insufficient energy on board. But that's what I would say is a really good starting point. There's a blog on my website, which is one of the first ones I did, I think about 2.5 years ago, which is like a little checklist of, is your metabolism struggling? It's not definitive, but it's like some questions that, and if you answer yes to like more than one of those, then I would say that there are some, possibly some problems that are worth looking into.
Yeah. And do you give guidelines in that on how to roughly interpret the temperature or like, so for example, temperature, if that goes down, is that positive? Is that
I don't,
no.
because again, it's contextual. I'm always happy to engage in, if somebody pings me on Instagram or Facebook, I'm always happy to, engage in a discussion around that. I never want to be one of these people that say, right, here's a checklist and away you go, because it's demeaning the complexity behind their situation. And also, I think what can become, if your cognitive function is good, and if you have a logical brain, and you can look at these things dispassionately, it's fine. But actually, to somebody who's in a bit of a pickle, may have got some stress hormones, they might say, oh my God, my temperature's gone down, it's really bad news. And I don't think anybody should have to sort of go through that process, on their own. So that's what I'm always aiming to do with my clients, is sort of be there for them when they are like, oh, my temperature's, plummeted after I've eaten and I feel awful. And actually, that's quite a common thing. That's I see that with my parents. They avoid eating, I think, because they don't eat enough. And when they do eat, it doesn't make them feel very good, because essentially it removes the stress hormones that they're effectively running on. So yeah, no, I don't have this is how to interpret, because I don't.
A 3-step plan for everyone.
No, I don't.
You need that. You got to monetize that. So if someone's listening to this and they're intrigued, they'd like to work with you, how do you work with people?
So most commonly online. That's, I would say, the majority of my clients. We work online via Skype or FaceTime or whatever it might be. The most common program that people are working with me on is the Introduction to Metabolic Repair. It's a 6-week program. It is an introduction. I always stress that, because no one's going to be fixed in that period of time. Or if they're in Oxfordshire, then they can come along to my new practice and work with me face to face there.
Great. I'll include all the links to Instagram.
Thank you.
Anyone listening, you should follow Sarah on Instagram. So there's a lot of stuff there that I didn't get to, but I'm sort of conscious of time, and I don't want to overload people. But maybe we could do one again another time and go deeper.
Yeah.
But do you have any final things you want to share? Wrap up?
I don't. I think that's, as much as anything, that's been interesting for me. I've enjoyed it. I think they've been really good questions that you've asked me. Have caused me to think, and I always like that. And I'd like to do a follow up. But no, thank you. I've enjoyed it, and I hope that for other people listening as well, it doesn't come across that I've been particularly ambiguous or obtuse, and that there are obviously. I hope I've explained well enough the reasons behind my apparently evasive answers.
Yeah, no, I think, like I said, I think there's an answer within not the evasion of an answer, but with the honesty of not being able to give an answer.
Yes,
and that's a tough thing to do, and it shows integrity. So I think people will appreciate that. People who will respond to your work and be willing to work with you anyway will be on board with that, and those who aren't, well, they're not ready. So
exactly.
Yeah. So that was my chat with Sarah Kennard. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, if you have any questions, if you want us to elaborate on anything or go deeper into a certain topic, get in touch, because there was so much more that we could have talked about, and there was so much more that I had planned, but we just sort of got talking, and I just sort of asked questions, and Sarah went off and explained everything in great detail. So there was so much more to cover, and we'll likely do it another time. If you'd like something specific, let me know. I've included resources in the description, in the show notes, all that sort of stuff. If you want to connect with Sarah, if you want to work with her, if you just want to follow her on Instagram, I'd highly recommend it. I'm pretty sure she'll be on Facebook. I'll include that. Because a lot of this is, you're not going to get this information from your standard sources, and I'm always trying to figure out ways of just drip feeding you a slightly different perspective, so that you begin to start thinking differently, so that you begin to start challenging your thinking. And how entrenched you might be in a specific nutritional dogma or viewpoint or whatever it is. So I highly recommend her work, whether you work with her or follow her online. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the show. Let us know what you thought. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that stuff. Share it, make it go viral, whatever it is. And yeah, have a good day, and I'll see you in the next one.